Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nick Williams.
Hey, I'm Blake Sharkeyes.
And we're the Summit Realty Group podcast.
Yeah.
Good morning, Blake.
Morning, man.
Good. Another Friday, another week in the books.
Yeah, it always feels. Anyways, let's do this.
It's early morning here. We got to get the sod done before we start our actual work day. But today we want to talk about an offer and how buyers can put things in the offer that will help and detract from their offer.
Yeah.
And there's always pros and cons. And then how the sellers typically perceive those kinds of things written into the offer. So we're just kind of diving into it. We're going to start talking about some terms. We're going to explain those terms and hopefully provide some information so next time you buy a property or sell a property, you know what all this stuff means.
Yeah, so very broad. You can basically put anything you want into an offer. So people always ask me, can I do this? And I always, as a joke, say, you can offer, a piece of hair and a paperclip to somebody like
Well, since you said that, what's the weirdest thing you put in an offer?
Yeah, I was kind of bringing this up.
Yeah.
So I think you are going to one-up me because I know the story. So the weirdest thing I've sold with a house and put in an offer was a goat. So there was a goat in the backyard. They're like, I sure would like that goat. Kind of joking. I said, you want to ask for it? And they said, well, you think we'll get it? I was like, I don't know. They'll just say no otherwise. And sure enough, they're like, no, the goat loves the area and it has a good yard, blah, blah, blah. So they end up leaving it. That was kind of my funny one. But
that's a good one.
You've got one better.
Well, I got a similar one that's not as funny. Cat. So we bought a house. It was a very strange deal. My buyer happened to bump into the seller. The seller had a realtor. I was with the buyers. Then we wrote everything on paper. And the seller countered us and said, in order to buy my house, you have to keep my cat.
See, I think that's a better story.
I think that...
Because I really didn't like that.
It's not as weird as a goat. But, yeah, my buyer did not want the cat. My buyer still has the cat.
Yeah. Did they think they were going to keep the cat? Or it's like kind of grew on them situation?
Well, it was a rental property. It was kind of like... indoor-outdoor cat, and so it really lived in the garage. But now, I believe he got renamed to Major or Lieutenant Colonel or something like that, and is actually a member of the family, and now lives in the house, not just in the garage. So, good story there.
Yeah.
But the strangest thing that my buyers have ever written into a contract is I had an eye doctor that was buying a property back in 2021 when everybody was competing and all this stuff. The offer was insane. $15,000 over, appraisal guarantee, all that stuff. And then in order to put them, because we're still competing at that point, and got down to the final two offers, and he said, I will give you a 5-year prescription for free contacts for anybody in the family that needs them.
I like that.
And so it was something that didn't cost him a lot of money, because he gets, samples and, wholesale discounts.
Yeah.
And so for pennies on the dollar, he was able to make his offer a couple $100 better on top of the cash that he threw at it.
But to them, it may have been a few $1,000s
exactly.
value or something.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've always
a
thought,
year of contacts is like $1,000.
Yeah. I've always thought that being able to barter, and I'm kind of an old school mindset, but if you can ever do those, everybody wins in that situation. My gravel guy, he was, he's doing my gravel, and we're talking this and that, waiting on loads to come through and whatnot. And he had just like story after story, like he bought this car. Oh, I just dropped a few loads off there. Blah blah blah. Anyway, so we need a gravel pit for one, but
we should look into that.
So back to, you can offer anything.
Anything.
It's the reason you want a realtor helping you is you don't want to offer anything. You obviously are not going to offer a paper clip and a nose hair to somebody. Right. Like, it's just not going to work really well. So. My general...
But feet pics might work.
Feet pics might work. My general overlay on a contract is I want to write in as little as necessary, but, be willing to write things in to make the deal work. So it's like, you don't want to get so complicated that you're possibly harming the deal later, and you're adding every,
and you want to be clear. Yeah. Like, everything needs, when you read the sentence or paragraph that you put into the offer, it needs to be clear. And something I get a lot from my buyers and sellers is and or options. Everything that goes on paper should be an ultimatum. I, the buyer, am telling you, the seller, I want to give you $400,000.
Yeah.
Not $400,000 or $580 in a credit. You can always
choose the best option. And what I get permission from the clients, like, hey, I can call the other agent and be like, hey, yeah, if this would work better in another way, we can switch it if necessary. But choose like, hey, this is their preferred way. And if the seller's good with it, if we're coming from the buyer side, if the seller's good with it, then hunky dory, you get what you want. However, there are things, and this is a hard balance because you're negotiating, you're trying to get the best deal for your client, whether it's the buyer or the seller. But again, on the buying side, sometimes I just tell the buyer, like, hey, this thing you want to add in is going to weaken your offer.
For example, contingency.
Early occupancy is the one I get all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, so people wanting to move in early. I was like, if you don't get to move in early, would you not buy the house? And they're like, no. I said, well, let's leave it off and we'll negotiate it once we're already in, basically. Because then if you bring it into play, in that scenario, the seller, once we're under contract, the seller can just say, no, I don't want to do early occupancy. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But, it's one of those things, it's like you don't muddy up the waters more than necessary.
But if you need it at the same time, so there's things you have to sometimes weaken your offer to fit yourself. So, there's a lot of sellers. We're dealing with one or dealt with one in the past that didn't want to sell his property for another 6 months. And all they were looking for was a rent back. So I want to sell my house now, but I want to live in it for another 6 months. And we had to explain, like, it's really hard to get a buyer that wants to wait half a year to move into the property they just bought. And the loan terms that won't even allow that, like a VA or a FHA loan where you have to occupy within 60 days of possession.
Well, it's supply and demand. So in that particular scenario, whatever supply we had, we were going to take it down to at least 1%. Like, that's how big of a deal that one would be. And so it's like, okay, now your supply is so low for what you have, the demand. The demand is now so low for what you have. You're probably going to sell it at a discount. So could we find him a buyer that would do that? Yes, but is he going to get the best price? Probably not.
I got a listing right now, commercial property, same thing. Great property, great potential there, but it's partially unfinished and it's unfinanceable. Yeah. And so it's $1 million listing, but it literally requires a cash buyer in a commercial market with $1 million that has the ambition to finish the property. And so if you're looking at that, you just went from commercial property, your demand is 100%. Yeah. Then unfinished will shrunk it to 50. Yeah. Now cash, you're at 5%. And that's of everybody looking, and not everyone's looking for that specific structure, location, etc. So pretty easy ways to disqualify you as a buyer or seller depending on whatever you put into these offers.
So back to what can be written in. So we have basically a pre-written contract for the most part.
Templated.
You template it.
And that's legal jargon, so there's a boilerplate. And there's most of the stuff that's boilerplate isn't the terms. It's the buyer bewares, the right to duty and inspection, the right to retain your earnest money or lose it, depending on the way the offer goes. So a lot of the contract, I'd say half of it, is just pre-written legal jargon saying this is who you are and what you're doing, who I am, what I'm doing, what the appraisal is, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so then we fill in the blanks, basically. So one of the big blanks, and this is the double-edged sword, is paragraph 16. Yep. Is a
additional terms and remarks.
Additional terms and remarks, and it's just a bunch of blank lines. So anybody can write in anything.
And they always have addendums you can put to it if you want to.
You can
go crazy with it.
You can go crazy. Yeah. But the paragraph 16, in my mind, is the most dangerous paragraph for everybody involved. Legally, and again, no lawyer or anything like that, but legally, and for clients, not even legally, but like as far as the offering process, because when again, you can do anything, you do not want to do anything. Right. You want to get the house in the best terms, and so what are some of the things? Like, there's a few things I put in that there almost every single time. So what are a few things that you do in that paragraph?
So the most common thing that I write in paragraph 16, other than contingencies, and I think we need to spend some time on contingencies alone because there's a million of them, but is
what do you mean by contingency? Let's clarify that.
My offer is dependent on this situation either not happening or happening.
And so if that switch is not flipped either way, if that contingency doesn't happen.
It's a straightforward offer if you don't have a contingency in it. A contingency in it, for example, we have a lot of military individuals up here, contingent on military orders. So the Army or Air Force already told you you're going to Wainwright or Eielson. Good luck, start packing, do your thing, but you don't have a paper order yet. I can still sell you a house. The VA will still lend you on that. However, depending on the lender, but you're basically telling the seller, I want to buy your house, I want to go ahead and get this under contract, I want to get the ball rolling, but I'm not even positive yet if I'm coming to Alaska. So that's a scary one, and depending on the year, right now, I think we can get those under contract. A year ago, that was a death sentence.
Yeah.
And there's other ways, too, to minimize your risk without a contingency, like lower earnest money, so you're more willing to walk away from than 2% of your purchase price.
So in this particular case, they do get orders. You can remove the contingency.
Anytime.
Yep.
As soon as you get that paper,
yeah,
you can
but
remove it.
and then it finds out they get orders somewhere else. For this particular one, that contingency is now protected pretty much to earnest money. That's what we're
pretty much.
looking out
That's
for.
the main thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, legally covering you from any kind of recourse because it's built into the contract that you can walk away, and protecting your earnest money, which at certain points in the contract gets basically locked in and is non-refundable unless another one of these scenarios happens later on down the road.
Yeah, and there's contingencies built into the pre-written stuff
already there.
About. There's most of the contingencies you're going to use are already there.
Every buyer wants me to put a contingency based off of the home inspection in there, and I have to explain to them I don't have to write that. That's already built into the contract. If you do a home inspection and there's a radioactive rat that lives in the house that we can't get rid of, you can walk away from the property.
Yeah.
Retain your earnest money. You lose the inspection fee, but you can retain your earnest money.
And then those kind of items are default, and you can take them away. So if you want to buy as
and you can alter them.
Yeah, so you can alter those. So we default the things that come up 99% of every deal. But sometimes you have an as-is deal. Well, before a lot of our stuff was as-is, but anyway, so you got a contingency. I forget where we're.
Yeah, so the number one thing I write into all of my offers, though, lately is buyer closing cost credits. So that's the buyer asking the seller, I'm going to give you the amount you want for the house, but because the interest rate's so high, because the purchase price is so high, because X, Y, and Z, we want you to cover our closing costs. And so that's no upfront cost to the buyer or seller. And it just means at closing, let's say the seller has $200,000 in profit, and the buyer requires $6,000 in closing cost credits. That $6,000 comes out of their $200,000 in profit. So the seller is paying for the buyer's fees and expenses.
So sellers, I want to pause here. I want all sellers to reframe how they look at paying for other buyers' closing costs. So before, when there's multiple offers, you weren't accepting those offers anyways, but now you're going to start seeing them
very frequently.
Yeah. So some people come back and they remove the closing costs prepaids. Like they're like, hey, they offered $300,000, but they wanted me to pay $8,000 of their closing costs. I'll take the $300,000 offer, but wipe off those closing costs. It's like, don't do that. In most cases, they need those closing costs paid because of the cash they have in hand. So if you did want to counter that one in particular, counter at $308,000.
Yeah, counter it with a higher purchase price.
Exactly.
Keep the credits in there.
Exactly.
So that way you still make that equity back.
Yeah.
Right.
Your net is the only thing that matters.
Your net's the only thing that matters, and
Yeah.
that's something important for buyers to think about too. Buyers don't understand the difference between dropping the price, asking for a credit, or asking for something that costs money, like a 2-to-1 buy down.
Yeah.
Right. All three of those to a seller is just a minus this much money, minus this much money, or minus this much money, and repairs factor in that too. And we don't even know that until after we're under contract and moving forward.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take advantage of every penny the seller is able to give you, and let's say we happen to know that information, or willing, able or willing, right? And then all of a sudden repairs come along and you want to ask for another $10,000 worth of repairs, you just killed the deal because you went too hard at the beginning. But at the same time, we don't want to go soft at the beginning either if the seller is already willing to give us some stuff. And then
there's a negotiation is this wonderful, beautiful thing. My favorite part is negotiation, and I really missed that in the last years because it was basically
it was bidding. It wasn't negotiating. It was bidding.
No, you were on your knees begging for the seller to take your offer, and I mean that's one form of negotiation, I guess. But I like when there is a little more balance back and forth. But my opinion is, if you drive hard and you try to get every dime from, let's say, a seller for your buyer, like you feel great when you get that offer and you're like, we got you the best deal. And
your
like
chance
you said,
of failing to close
it goes way up because they are so irritated with you. My brother had
and so tight on money. I mean, one little thing, let's say the septic fails on week 6,
and it just to them it feels like they're just getting beat down over and over, and they're like, all right, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm not fixing the septic. No, we gave them $30,000 on this, we gave them $5,000 on this, and so there is this, like, again, a balance. But anyways, closing costs.
No, great point. So closing costs is one.
Yeah.
Something that I am encouraging buyers to put into their offers more and more now. So the interest rate right now is at like 7%. It did dip a little bit after the election. So we want to be at like 6.8 right now. But let's call it 7. So buying a house now versus buying the same exact house, the same exact price back in March, you're looking at a $200 to $300 a month difference, and that's significant.
Yeah.
So lenders came up with something called a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 buy down. And essentially what that is asking the seller to subsidize my interest rate for 2 to 3 years, depending on if you do the 2-to-1 or the 3-2-1. So we'll use a 3-2-1. The 2-1 is the same thing, just 1 year shorter. But a 3-2-1 buy down is in year one, the seller is paying for a 3% interest rate drop,
which is huge,
for 1 year. Then on year two, the interest rate drops by 2%, not again from the 3, but goes up from 3 down to 2.
Let's say it's 7%. So for year one, you're going to pay 4% interest.
4%.
Okay.
The next year, you'll pay 5%. The next year and the third year, you'll pay 6%. And then by the fourth year, you'll pay your full 7%. And so the seller is paying upfront to subsidize that interest rate so that every month for the next 3 years, you have a lower interest rate than what you would have had.
Now, does your monthly payment reduce, or do you just pay more to principal?
Your monthly payment reduces.
Okay.
So if you can afford what you were planning on spending, make that same payment, because the seller is essentially paying your interest rate while you can then add more to principal. If money's tight, save that money so when you do get to year 3 or 4 and your mortgage is higher, you have the saved money from the first 2 years that you can roll over into your expenses.
Why is this? This is a good idea. I think it's a great idea for our area in particular with military. Because a lot of military people are here for 3 years.
3 years. So if you do a 2-to-1 buy down, you're only paying your interest rate for 1 year. If you do a 3-2-1 buy down, you will never pay your interest rate unless you want to keep the property longer than your allotted time here in Alaska.
So you can also, most people are familiar, they may not be familiar, but discount points, you can buy your interest down permanently, but it's expensive and it's not very much. You're buying down like 1/8%, and it's,
I have clients that are spending $6,000-$7,000 to reduce their interest rate by a fraction of a percent.
Exactly.
And it's great because it does reduce your monthly payment a little bit, but that is because you're reducing your interest rate over 30 years. The chances are you're going to refinance anyway, and when you do refinance, you don't get any of that money back.
No.
But with a 2-to-1 buy down, if you refinance after year 1, let's say next year the interest rate drops to 4%, and everybody refinances, that credit that still remains that the seller subsidized your interest rate for year 2 gets applied toward your refinancing costs. So it's a great benefit whether you refinance or not. You're having cheaper than what you would have payments.
Let's say you spent $10,000. I've never thought about this too deep. I guess you spent $20,000. Just to make it crazy. You spent $20,000.
Well, I got real numbers here. On a $360,000 house, a 2-to-1 buy down would cost about $8,000.
Yeah.
And a 3-2-1 buy down would cost about $14,000 from the seller.
Yeah.
And buyers can pay this for themselves too. I just don't know why you would. You're just paying your interest up front. So for buyers, don't offer to buy this yourself. It's a thing you want the sellers to pay for you.
So if you, let's say you bought, again, whatever, $10,000 in discount points, not a 3-2-1 buy down. So you bought your interest down, again, half a percent.
We'll call it half a percent.
Yeah, whatever it is, and you sell in 4 to 7 years, which is pretty average.
Normal.
Or you refinance in that time as well. You get none of that $10,000 back.
None.
Although you bought your interest rate down for a 30-year term. That's why it's so expensive to do.
And why you get so little.
Yeah.
And that's why the 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 buy down is such a big percentage, because it's only a 2 to 3 year period over 30 years. And that's when you need it, right?
Yeah.
Over that time, you can hopefully reinvest that money and get some dividends back, maybe start a business with it,
or just put it in the house.
Or put it into the house and grow that equity position in the house so you have the opportunity to sell later on, especially if you were in a situation. These would have been great if, it wouldn't have happened, but in 2021 when people were buying and bidding so high, if we could have gotten these rate buy downs, it would have been great for now because your equity position would have been so much higher since you're spending more money on principal instead of interest.
Well, I don't think we brought up either. Maybe if you don't understand how great that is, we're talking like monthly payments being reduced like
$600 the first year, $400 the second year, $200 the third year,
depending on the purchase price.
And that right there will cover all of your utilities.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Every single month you're not paying. And you're still putting the same amount towards principal, but you're not paying that much just to interest. Which interest, of course, is the bummer. It's the rent.
It's what the bank made. Yeah, it's the rent that you're paying the bank for the money.
So $600 today. I don't know. I really really like these. I've actually not done one yet. I'd like to do one. Yeah. So I like the idea of them. And again, you could get to the end of these 4 years, and we're back to 4%. Refinance the thing. Yeah. Bada bing, bada boom, baby. And you never paid 7%.
And all these things are great. So every buyer, of course, wants all of them, right? Yeah. I did just write an offer last week where we reduced the purchase price by $5,000. We then asked for a 3-2-1 buy down to the equivalent of about $16,000, and then asked for an $8,000 buyer's closing cost credit. So this way, the buyer was getting the house essentially for free, not having spent any of their money to purchase it. Yeah. They had a 0% down VA loan, so there's no down payment required. Yeah. There's no PMI required on the VA home loan, and then on top of that, that, they had 3 years of a rate buy down on top of it. Amazing deal.
And that sounds like from the seller.
Seller said, "Hell no."
Yeah. Well,
I'm not giving you $30,000 in concessions.
Yeah. But I've had I reduced one house by $45,000 a month ago. I reduced another house we got under contract.
Well, let's talk about that real quick.
$40,000 less. So.
You reducing the price by $40,000 versus reducing it by $25,000 and giving a $15,000 rate buy down.
Yeah,
the difference for the seller is the same financially.
Exactly.
Dollar by dollar, both of those are the same.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's look at the monthly payment. Dropping it $40,000, the monthly payment is still higher than if you offered $40,000 more and had this rate buy down because the interest rates are so bad.
Those are cash deals.
They are, yeah. You got that one on lockdown lately. By the way, if you have lots of cash, call Blake Schreckheis. He knows what to do with your money.
I've been doing a good run here.
Yeah.
So
Great year of
yeah,
cash.
we could keep doing that. But back to paragraph 16, because I think everything we put in here is like this super broad conversation. But so closing costs are a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I would throw in the interest rate buy down,
Yep.
kind of a closing cost, because buyers can buy it. But so one thing that I almost always put in is the septic testing.
Always. Oh, well, if you have a septic.
Yes. So
Yep.
if you have a septic, now in paragraph 3 is, am I right on that? Yeah.
Yep.
Is where you put the
Well, and septic
who's paying.
inspection.
Yeah, who's
Yeah.
paying for the inspection? But paragraph 16, almost every time, unless you're buying something as is and you're using a loan, especially, we're going ahead and pre-writing in the seller is going to repair or replace the septic system if necessary to meet our minimum standards.
And to sellers, the reason why we're writing in this, we want to make sure from the get-go you understand that the lender is going to require that.
Yeah.
Conventional loan is a gray area, but with FHA, VA, RD, all of those are going to require a passing septic test.
Mm-hmm.
And so by us not writing it in there, all we're doing is leaving it open-ended that if it fails, that you want to renegotiate. But at that point, that has to be completed either way. So the only thing you were getting to at that point is the buyer's not going to buy the house.
So,
whereas up front, we've already closed that loophole.
I think my personal opinion is it is to the buyer's advantage to negotiate as many times as possible throughout the deal, because you'll keep whittling down. Now listen to the whole thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's the seller's advantage if you can negotiate everything at the first step, which is the contract. So to broaden it out, not to get into too huge of conversation, we just spoke about this. If you have inspections pre-done for your house,
Mm-hmm.
when you get the buyer under, they already have seen the inspection. Maybe they asked for repairs, maybe not. They've already seen the septic inspection. Maybe you've had to fix it, maybe not, whatever. And you know exactly, for the most part.
It helps us determine the seller's net up front. Whereas in a normal traditional way of this, the buyer's going to do all these inspections,
Yeah.
your net is a variable.
Well,
versus a fixed.
what can happen very frequently, and it's hard to say because you don't do the same house 2 times through. It's always a variety. But we can, in a normal deal, you can get to the seller where they're gritting their teeth, like, I guess I'll take that net. Okay. And then the inspection comes. Like, oh, shoot, I have $5,000 in repairs.
$10,000 roof.
Well, what's another $5,000? Yeah, I guess I'll do that. Shoot, the septic failed. That's going to be $18,000. He's like, well, what are you going to do? You can't sell it to anybody with a broken septic. So what he thought was his bottom, he's now $20,000 lower, which happens all the time. As before, if he knew he had to do all those items right up front, he probably would have pushed the price up. Like, hey, you're asking for all these things. So it's not a perfect scenario, but
It's a common one, though.
Yeah. So as again, sellers listening in, like if you can have it all done at step 1, it's way easier.
And you know, there are things like the
make more
inspection.
money.
It's $600,
Yeah.
right? It is a buyer's expense. Most buyers pay for that themselves.
Yeah.
But if a seller is willing to make that investment in the sale early on,
It'll pay back way more. than
I
600.
feel like you can negotiate so much quicker and better, and you know what your outcome is going to be so much earlier on.
And the deals, I mean,
And the chance of the
you're
deal
not worried
falling
about
through
us.
are so low. You know?
Yeah, the worries about the realtor's stress does not come into this.
That doesn't matter.
But really, you're feeling a stress too. If we're stressed, you're probably more stressed because we see it so much. But the stress level on these deals that have everything done up front, come on. You're waiting. If you have a loan, you're waiting on an appraisal. If it's cash, you're waiting on title work. And it's just like, again, bada bing, bada boom. How many times am I going to say that? Like, it's so much smoother. So anyways, writing in, the reason we write in certain repairs is technically we have somewhere previous where if the lender requires repairs, you know, that is a contingency. So we don't technically need to write that in, but we want to be very clear, like, hey, this is going to be a seller cost for one. So we do put it all in the seller right there. And at the end of the day, we don't usually get too much kickback because sellers know they're going to have to fix it for you or the next
And that's
buyer.
usually because
Yeah.
the sellers are also working with a realtor. We don't have that many for sale by owners here, and they also have a huge fail rate. So they usually, after they failed once or twice, hire a realtor.
I will disagree with you there. this is the most for sale by owner market I've been in.
Really?
Yeah.
This is my only market I've been in.
So I think it's because the Alaskan like do it yourself kind of mindset,
Right.
which I appreciate.
Yeah.
But yeah,
the problem is you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the biggest frustration with for sale by owners is they keep trying to breach the contract unknowingly.
Yeah, not maliciously.
And then not maliciously. Yeah. They're not saying, "Oh, I agreed to this. I'm not agreeing to it now." They just don't understand that once you agree to it, it's agreed upon.
Yeah.
You know?
It's tough because we're always in those deals. And again, it's generally what happens is you're representing the buyer, and you're a professional who's done it hundreds of times, and they are someone who's maybe sold a house. If they're old and they sell a lot of houses, maybe 20.
Older.
Old. I'm saying old. Like if they're 70, they're old. We're clear on that. No?
If you're 70, you're probably not listening to us right now. And if you are, hey, please hit us up in the comments. I would love to give you a shout out next episode.
Exactly. So, but if you've sold 20 houses, I think it's a lot for most people. Again, there's investors and stuff like that. But we, Nick has done what was your top year, like 135 houses in 1 year?
Well, yeah, 134, I believe.
Yeah. So I've done 90 just to, but not at 135. But anyways, we'll do that in a year. Mm-hmm. And so every month we're closing them. So just as a reminder to people, like, I'm not saying that we're better than you, but chances are someone who practices more is going to be better than you.
I thought you were going somewhere else. Right. Experience. We're more experienced, right?
Yes.
So I would say even my investors who have plenty of properties, 60 doors. That's probably the equivalent of 25 properties, right?
Yeah.
Doors are number of units in a unit. So if you buy fourplex, you have 4 doors, but it's one property, right? Yeah. So I would say even those very experienced investors that I have, I still do more deals in a year than they've done in a lifetime.
Yes.
And so that's what we're trying to break through to people is, it's not about the money. It's about closing the deal, helping the clients, and in the end we get paid. But the things that we write into our offers drive the entire transaction. And the cleaner you can keep them, the better of a success rate that you have.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where you're going to be able to cash flow your properties and all that stuff. But guess what? You're never going to cash flow. A deal you don't close, a deal you DFT, because of little terms that you want to put in there. Mm-hmm. So for buyers and sellers, you got to be willing to give some concessions because this is a negotiation. So maybe you do start a little bit tougher, but then willing to back down. Or you do the opposite, you start a little bit lighter, but then throughout the process you negotiate a bit harder for repairs or something like that. Mm-hmm. What I do want to drive home for everybody is you can't have it all. And the saying's backwards in my opinion, so I'm gonna intentionally say it's wrong, but you can't eat your cake and have it too, right? After you ate it, it's gone. And everybody wants to lower the price, ask for closing cost credits, move in early, not pay rent, have a rate buy down from the seller. Yeah, ultimately, you know what I want to do? I want to walk up to a seller, take his keys, and say thank you, and not pay $1 for the house. But that's unrealistic. Mm-hmm. So knowing that the price of goods and services are going up, costs of houses are going to go up. Yeah. And so,
I think we're in a sweet spot right now, though.
I think right now, and the interest rates are stupid high. I'm not trying to, but you have the ability to negotiate right now that I have not seen since 2019. And I would even say right now, because of the huge pendulum shift that we had, what we call a correction, not a bubble pop, but the correction that we're seeing in the market is bringing us right back to 2019. And so your interest rates are going to harm you a little bit more, but you can negotiate things that you were never able to negotiate before. Mm-hmm. And in the end, we all assume that interest rates are going to drop again and you can refinance. Yep. In the 80s, the interest rates were at 20-something%. I talked to a guy yesterday. He was in the 70s. Yeah. But back when he bought in the 80s, when he first came up here, he said, I don't feel bad for buyers or sellers. Because when I came up here, the interest rate was 12%. I had to remind him at that point in time, you're probably paying $65,000 for the same house. Probably that is $400,000 now. Exactly. But then he reminded me too that bread cost 5 cents and milk was $1.
It's always that way. Like again, and I said this probably 2 podcasts ago, whereas at some point 2022 is going to be the good old days. Yeah. You're like, you bought that house for $400? Oh my gosh, everything's $2.5 million now. So
and I think I said that 2 or 3 podcasts ago that you eventually people aren't going to be able to afford. The normal people, the everyday people like you and me, aren't going to be able to afford a house because corporations are buying them up, because the equity in the value, not the equity of these properties are rising so quickly. I mean, even when I showed up here in 2016 where you could buy a pretty decent house for $220, I can tell you right now, I've been all of them on the market right now. There's nothing at $220 right now that looks anything like what I saw in 2016. No. Everything that it was $220 then is $320 now.
Oh, easy.
So we're looking at a $100,000 increase in a 6 to 7 year period.
Yeah, it's...
So what does 15 years from now look like?
Exactly. I mean, this is not likely to happen in the same fashion, and I hope not, because a lot of the things that drove those prices kind of suck. But
Right.
so another thing that I put in besides that is a automatic extension.
Careful with those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hear this.
So
Well, let me tell what it is
do
first,
it.
and then you. So I generally do a 2-week, 14-day automatic extension on the closing date, and this is from the buyer side, of course, because things can go wrong, and it's one less negotiation I have to do at the end, where it's like, we gotta extend, or this and that. So,
and that's usually not a hard part because at that point the seller, it does have the fish on the hook. They want to close this much, and their money's on the hook.
Yeah.
And I used to, and I still do on most of my offers, write those in too. But what I've learned over the last 2 deals that I just closed, because both of them had the same issue. We've had some delays with repairs. Contractors right now, please hurry up, are really slow. And so what we did is we expired on the contract, but we had that automatic extension pushing us 2 more weeks. Okay. The lender married up the closing date with the rate lock extension. So had we not had that automatic 2-week extension, at this point I could have said, hey, due to the contractors you selected, we can't close on time. You, the seller, should pay for our rate lock extension fee.
You're missing the
But because
point.
I, the buyer's representative, put a 2-week extension into that offer, we didn't have the negotiation power to force them or coerce them into paying that. And so they said, what are you going to do? Not buy the house? It's your fee. You let it expire. We still have a contract for 2 weeks, so we're not late even though we're late.
Yeah.
And
to
so
be fair,
careful with that.
your argument is probably still weak without it. I mean, I would say weak.
I have like
Unless
an
the buyer
80 to
was willing to
90%. Yeah, well, they are at that point because the rates are so high, and my military clients have the option. We can always go live on base.
Yeah, that's true.
Or we can rent something for 6 months, and we have plenty of month-to-month rentals here in town too, where people are like, "Cool, I'm just going to hop into the old Caribou Cabins."
Yeah, that's
or
interesting.
something, and
I guess the balance on that is whose fault is usually the extension. It's almost always the buyer, but unless there's like long repairs.
I would argue.
You think
Why
so?
would it be the buyers?
Usually it's the lending. That's to be honest, I haven't
I want to
used a
throw
lot of
some
mine.
lenders under the bus right now, just so everybody knows, but I don't want to ruin my
Well,
reputation.
just
with those
their whole
lenders.
process. I'm not saying it's any particular lender, but you've got
It is though. We know who you are.
Some particular lenders. No.
I'll show one right now. USAA.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Give me an email. Let me know why you can't close a deal in
At least it
Alaska.
wasn't a hometown.
By the way, I do love USAA as car insurance and banking.
Oh yeah.
It's just their loans kind of.
And I had to reel that back. It's Veterans Day.
It
as
is.
we record
Hey,
this.
thank you for your service, guys. It is Veterans Day today.
Not
So
when you watch this, but anyways,
it's probably Christmas when you're watching this at this rate.
What we're talking about is so wonderful. It'll be thousands of years from now. People on Mars are going to be watching this, thinking, "Wow."
Elon Musk is
couple
going to
of
have this
Neanderthals
downloaded on
thought
his
they knew what
internet.
they were talking about.
Homo
I forgot the
sapiens.
point I was making. But
Yeah, we got sidetracked.
anyways, extensions. Yeah,
Yes.
I don't know. I have not been doing a ton of extensions lately. I do still write that in, and now
That's
you're
because you're
making
doing
me
cash.
think.
You don't have lenders.
Well, that's true.
You're all cash lately.
But the lenders are going pretty quick too.
And I have no problem with my lenders right now.
Yeah.
They're closing things on time too. There's a few, especially FHA, because there's so many underwriters that need to touch the file. FHA sometimes go over, but VA, conventional cash, RD loans, we're closing those within time.
Yeah.
So I'm not too worried about those. So the extensions are things that sometimes I write in there, sometimes I don't.
I like that you put the other side. I didn't see any negative to that.
Yeah, the rate lock extension has come up a few times.
I think our
recently.
closing dates are interesting. Not to get again too off track of what we started with, but so again, I sold in a different state. Blah blah blah. I always say that. And the way we had a whole paragraph on the closing date, and so you pick the closing date, and it was kind of ambiguous and frustrating in one way, but it's also kind of nice. So if we didn't meet the closing date, it opened up a negotiation point. It did not mean a breach in contract.
Right.
It did not mean that the buyer or seller was at fault. It's like, hey, you've got to negotiate this, and then basically, if you can't negotiate it, you've got whatever powers at law.
Right.
Like you can sue each other. So that was the frustrating part, where it's like, okay, we can't negotiate it, and there's no clear winner.
And here you can negotiate it, though. I mean, even here, if we expire, it's like, hey, we expired 2 days ago. We forgot about it. Let's just extend. And we do want to drive home 90% of the time. At this point, the buyer's committed, the seller's committed. Seller's probably already moved out or has movers locked in. Buyer's already on their way up here or currently waiting in a hotel to move in. So something over the last week because the lender needs to go through underwriting again, or because the one repair wasn't done correctly and that guy needs to come back out. Those deals are going to close 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
It's or 10 out of 10 times. It's the weird situations where the seller refuses to move out until he's actually signed the paperwork, or the contractor disappears. That's happened a few times up here where somebody's been paid to do a job and they just disappear, or go on a fishing
Lots
trip.
of bears. I'm sure that's what happens to them.
I wish it was getting eaten by bears, but no, they're actually probably out bear hunting.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't
to...
know. If they disappear on a deal, they deserve to be eaten by a bear.
Right.
So the closing date can be, I had one, again, this is down south. Mineral rights aren't really, nobody has mineral rights up here
Not
too
here.
much.
I mean, very few properties.
Yeah.
Goes back to original U.S. patents, but Alaska owns all the mineral rights for most of the properties. And then you can lease claims.
Yeah, so the way our contracts are written is all the property and any mineral rights owned by the seller is going to go with it.
Right.
So a lot of people wanted to retain their mineral rights. So this was not my deal. It was actually my broker, one of his first deals when he got in. The guy had like 800 acres and he had all the mineral rights, but he was retaining them. My guy forgot to write it in the contract that he's going to retain those mineral rights. They get to closing time, and the seller's like, I will not sign. I absolutely will not sign, which put him in breach because everything else was met.
I wonder how that works out. What the seller's intent on that was, because he doesn't own the land. He's not allowed to trespass, but he has a right to the minerals out of the ground. So if the buyer were to strike oil, the seller would retain a portion of the profits?
Yeah, so it's not his oil. The buyer owns surface rights, so everything below the ground, the seller in this case would still own that. And you have rights to get to your minerals. So you can, new owner cannot say, no, you cannot come get these minerals.
Oh, if that was a thing here, I would blanket that on every offer.
Yeah.
That would just be at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, exactly.
Fine print.
Yeah, so and you can do a similar thing here but
I over the 400 something deals I've done, I've seen maybe 2 people who's actually owned the mineral rights.
Yeah, it's
so rare.
It was not common down there either. Usually it was a large tract of lands, but they would get kept in this similar manner. So the guy says, I'm not going to sign this thing. And so they're sitting at a coffee shop together while the closing was supposed to happen. The buyer's plane gets delayed, so he couldn't make it to closing. So it was this wonderful thing in that case, the closing date was. Because now it's like, hey, we need to extend. He's like, that's great. You're not going to get the mineral rights because the buyer really wanted those.
Oh,
they
smart.
They wouldn't give them back.
Now you have that negotiation power. And so,
so it's kind of saved his bacon that his plane got delayed.
In summary for all of this, though, and this entire podcast is, be strategic about what you're offering.
Yeah.
Understand the process, which is why we brief it before we go to look at houses. It's not because we want you to know what's going on. We want you to plan ahead with us, come up with a game plan, a strategy, if you will, throughout the process on where you can renegotiate how we're tactically going to do that. We're sounding on military today on Veterans Day.
Yeah.
So be strategic, be tactical throughout the process, and then be willing to negotiate. Sometimes you got to lose a battle in order to win the war. Just one for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But so that's the summary of this podcast. Be creative, but at the same time be realistic and reasonable.
I want to talk about one more thing. Because I think it's important, and then we'll pinch it off. Escalation clauses. So before.
I haven't written one in months.
I haven't written one in a long time. That's not true. I just wrote one. Anyways, I don't want to get in that situation. So it is a really crazy thing that we did, I think. So
that we started doing them?
So before this would have happened, I would have said, you are insane to write escalation clauses.
Pause.
Yeah.
An escalation clause is an automatic price improvement based off of other offers on the table. So one will be written something to the effect of, the buyer agrees to pay the seller $2,000 more than any other offer, and you can write something like, will not exceed $500,000. You can cap it.
You don't have to.
You don't have to, though. And literally all you're saying is, anybody else that makes an offer, I will beat it. And then what I like to do in there as well is say the seller has to prove to me that the other offer is where it is in order for me to calculate what the best offer is. Because normally you're not going to see the other people's offers. So
the reason this is great, and the reason I ended up using it, and then I'll come back to why it's kind of crazy we're coming back to the times where you should not be using them. It was great because there was 5 offers, whatever, they're going to send you proof, like it was happening all over. You were doing all you could. You didn't care if you showed your hand as a buyer. In a time when there's not multiple offers, so I got one, so when all this was starting, again, I was down south, and I had a house that did not get in multiple offers. But the guy who was buying it was selling in a market that wasn't his own, and he thought it was going to have multiple offers. So he offered, whatever, we'll say $200,000, escalation clause up to $250,000. We countered back $250,000. They accepted it, said, hey, where's the proof of the other offer? I said, there was no other offer. He says, well, do you accept my offer? I said, no, I countered back your price. I countered back your price because I knew he was willing to go to $250. So that's the issue with the escalation clause. And this is why I want to bring it up, because it does go in paragraph 16, usually, is how we do those escalation clauses. Is that there, again, another double-edged sword where it's, like it can be a really great tool, and if you wanted a house in the last few years, you had to do it. Like I'm not saying you did the wrong thing.
And then appraisal gaps got even worse. I don't even like those.
Yeah,
that's for another episode.
That's a whole thing.
That's
so,
a whole episode.
And I'm glad we're getting away from them. But like nowadays, and again, there are specific cases where it'll work. And you still need to do it. There are still multiple offer situations happening, so you can still use them more sparingly. But I hate,
smaller gaps and
I hate for people to like. I would hate for an agent to get lazy. I guess I don't know if any agents are listening to this and think like, this way we keep the offer simple because like my guy's willing to pay $300, but he's going to start at $290. It's like you can't tell the other side what you're willing to pay. That's just obvious negotiation stuff, and it's what escalation clauses remove that basically because it just countered back and again that guy was frustrated. He felt like I wasn't being nice. And I'm like, I'm not here to be nice.
I'm not here to be your friend.
No,
I'm here to get the best possible deal for my buyer or seller depending on
he didn't ask me if there was other offers. I would have told him no. And maybe he would have wrote a better offer or whatever. So anyways, that was that one particular deal. So anything to add to that, or should we?
No, I think everything you hit that one out of the park.
Cool, wonderful,
home run.
All right, we've been playing footsie under the table. We have a super tiny table.
Well, we have to in order.
I know, so we can all fit. Every morning we start back here, and they say you got to move in. And they can't see you. They can't see you, and our knees rub each other all. So
thank you, lady producers.
Yep.
All right, well that wraps up today. Happy Veterans Day to everybody. Blake, thank you for your time again.
It's fun.
Again, I'm Nick Williams.
Oh yeah, I'm Blake.
And we're the Summit Realty Group podcast. Have a great day.
Oh, so